Okay.
Look, we got to get rid of them.
Okay,
This isn't politics.
I think you agree. Good. All right, let me go to Charlie. Charlie, what do the Dems have to do? You know, let me start with this premise. Every first-term president, midterm, always loses. His party always loses. And that is almost a historical precedent mandate given. Is that going to happen this time?
No, I mean, the Democrats have found a way to mess that up. They were doing very well in the generic ballot originally, but now you see Republicans leading. And look, Doug, you're the old school Democrat, my friend. The Democrat Party of today is not the Democrat Party that you're describing. You're describing like a moderate Republican agenda for America. The modern day Democrat Party, they want universal health care for all. They want a 90% income tax. They're socialist light. Bernie Sanders won the primary rightfully, and Hillary Clinton stole it from him. So your blend and your breed of the Democrat Party, that's nearly gone extinct.
Well, I'm trying to bring it back.
No, well, good for you. I'm just going to say you're going to have an uphill battle because the socialists are having much more success than the moderates right now in the base of the Democrat Party. The final point I'll say is this pathological resistance to President Trump is going to hurt them so badly in November. I always joke around. What's the Democrat message going to be? Bring back ISIS, raise your taxes, restart the Korean War. I say it facetiously, Doug. I say it facetiously, but you have seen in the last week, you've seen Democrats defend MS-13. You've seen them defend Hamas just because of their pathological resistance to this president. And you have to say, at what point are they going to finally recognize there's some good coming out of this White House?
And, you know, Doug, you can't deny that most of them were rooting for North Korea. You know, they were making fun of the president. The president is clearly negotiating in these difficult waters, and he's making a difference,
Look,
I think.
I applauded, like most right-thinking Americans, when the summit was on. When we were stood up in Singapore to plan, the president did the only thing he could, which was to pull out. I think, like, again, every right-thinking American, I want and hope the summit is on. But I do not stand with Hamas. I do not stand with our enemies like MS-13. I stand with Israel and making Jerusalem the eternal, indivisible capital of the of Israel. I'm sorry. I
Zero Democrats.
And Gina,
Zero Democrats.
I just have 15 seconds, Gina. You know, I think that we can all agree that this is really this next election is not just about one person. It's about the direction that we want to take the country. And I think we're in that direction now. I don't think it's going to change. Do you think?
I think that this is madness right now. That's why the president is polling so extremely high, much higher than Obama, let's not forget, at this point. And I'm afraid this big blue wave that they were depending on is going to be more like a big blue wet blanket, Judge. I don't think they're going to pull anything off in the midterms.
All right. Thanks so much to all of you.
Thank you.
All right. And coming up, more of this special edition of Hannity right after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left this evening. Now, don't forget to tune in tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern for Justice with me, Judge Janine. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders will join us. And you can also buy a copy of my book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, The Case Against the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.
Good evening from New York. I'm Jesse Waters in for Laura, and this is an Ingram Angle special, The Russian Cloud. The Russia probe has indeed been hanging like a cloud over the Trump administration. But the script is flipping as the investigators come under investigation. Tonight, we're going to examine these issues, whether Spygate is the Watergate of our era, or even worse. Our intel experts explain why timing is now the key to proving whether the Obama administration spied on the Trump campaign. Former FBI agents examined James Comey's claim that President Trump simply made up Spygate, despite all the growing evidence. Signs Americans are fed up with Russia, as Democrats start to fear a major backlash in November, and whether Trump can persuade Mueller to wind up his investigation by consenting to an interview. Now, let's begin our Ingram Angle special report on the Russian cloud with a look at Spygate. That's what President Trump calls the growing reports that the FBI under Obama placed at least one informant or spy in his presidential campaign. Those reports also fuel suspicion on the right that the Russia investigation has been nothing more than a political coup by Obama allies in the deep state against the duly elected President of the United States. In the era of an exploding surveillance state, have we actually witnessed an administration infiltrate the presidential campaign of the opposing party? An editorial in Wednesday's Investors Business Daily points out how timing is everything. The IBD noted that the timeline of the FBI's Russia investigation keeps shifting. And the earlier the probe began, quote, the less likely it is that it had anything to do with Russian involvement in the 2016 elections, but everything to do with stopping the surprising surge of Trump during the GOP primaries and beyond. Let's examine that prospect with some top-notch experts. Former FBI Special Agent Jeff Beatty is in Orlando. In Washington, Bill Benny, who served more than 30 years as a top intel official with the NSA before turning whistleblower. And here in New York, Steve Rogers, a former member of FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. Steve, we'll start with you. I have a theory here, and one's bad and one's a little worse. First, the Obama administration thought that there was Russian infiltration, so they used the Trump officials as bait in order to lure the Russians in. But nothing materialized, and they looked around, they thought, you know, I have some Trump people on the hook here, let's turn the screws. Or it was deceitful from the very beginning. They wanted eyes and ears in the Trump campaign, so without any probable cause, they cooked up this echo chamber of spies and lies and misinformation to get the surveillance. What do you think?
Jesse, if they were going for the Russians, they would have gone to the Trump campaign. They would have there in their hands the greatest assets of human intelligence right in the Trump campaign. They would have wired those individuals up and said, look, the Russians are coming after you. We need you. We need to wire you up. Let's trap the Russians. It was deceitful from the beginning. They were never going after the Russians, Jesse. They were going after Donald Trump.
Yeah, you know, Bill, where are the Russians here in this investigation? Because we see a lot of spies and FBI people. We haven't seen a lot of Russian spies. Have they ever materialized?
Not that I can see. I mean, even the evidence they put forth to say was a Russian hack from Guccifer 2 turns out to be a very clear fabrication, in fact, a very poor one. And it's provable through forensics that it's not a valid download remotely. So, I mean, all of it was fabricated.
So, Jeff, like Bill just mentioned, this all started with the so-called hack of the Democrats' computers. Now, the counter-intel investigation opened up a couple weeks after the emails released in the summer with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Remember, they rigged the primary, all that stuff. Why didn't the FBI then go look at this server at the DNC and do a forensic audit? I mean, wouldn't that be the first place you'd look if you were looking for Russian infiltration?
Well, you know, that goes back to 2015, and I'm a believer in your course of action too that you outlined at the top of the show, Jesse. But let me just give you what I see as the bluff, the bottom line up front. You know, the FBI gave a defensive briefing to the Democratic National Committee when they had information that there was a foreign entity trying to sway, influence, or move into or penetrate the Democratic apparatus. They did not do that for the Republican apparatus, as Steve alluded to. You know, what they did from the very beginning was treat the Republican apparatus differently. Democrat, defensive briefing, let's work together. Republican, I really think it was nothing but a fig leaf to use other government agencies to introduce a Russian raison d'etre to explain why they could then go ahead, launch an investigation for two purposes, Jesse. I think, first of all, to get political intelligence as to what was going on the inside of the campaign so that they could use it. But secondly, to be able to destroy their enemy. These guys, not to use a Chris Matthews reference, these guys were playing hardball. And, you know,
please, no Chris Matthews references on the show. Those are now banned for the rest of the hour.
Okay, no more. No more.
No, but you did pick up on a serious issue, though. Hold on, let me just get it. You
destroy your enemy or they'll destroy you.
Right. So they have suspicions about either Page or Manafort or Papadopoulos in the spring. And instead of maybe interviewing Papadopoulos or Page or whoever, Manafort, they don't do any of that. They don't even alert Donald Trump that they, you know, hey, we're supposed to protect you. Maybe, you know, there could be some issues. Instead, they just wiretap everybody and send spy rings throughout the whole campaign. It doesn't seem like an anti-Russia operation. It seems like an Trump
Jesse,
operation.
I believe the stage
They didn't
was
even
set
go into the
during-
DNC to
I
see if there
believe-
was a Russian in there
Right.
opening a back door to
I-
the servers.
I believe the stage was set the day James Comey testified before Congress and gave Hillary Clinton a pass, never really pursued the 33,000 missing emails, number one. What happened to Bill Clinton and the famous tarmac meeting at the airport with Loretta Lynch? They gave her a pass. And now, as I said earlier, why didn't they go to the Trump campaign and say, look, we think the Russians are coming. What we need you to do is to wire your people up. We want to trap the Russians. They tried to trap President Donald Trump, and they failed.
That's because they had them all wired. They were all copied. I mean, everything. Once you get one person in a campaign, you have the whole campaign. That's a two-hop principle.
That's right. That's right.
You get
And
everybody.
half these guys were coming in and out of Trump Tower. The other couple guys were overseas. They threw everything at this campaign. They threw spies, informants,
And
secret subpoenas, electronic surveillance, fake dossiers, unmasking. Every technicality that you use in an investigation, they threw everything at these guys. And you know what? Donald Trump still won the election.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that say?
No evidence. No evidence of collusion. No.
Right.
And keep in mind, though, Jesse, that they're using the NSA databases to do all this spying, and those go back to 2001, so they can retroactively analyze all the data on everyone in the campaign.
Right. Now, Clapper, as we all remember, one of the top intelligence chiefs under President Barack Obama, has been doing the rounds on television, and he disputes the whole spying thing, kind of. Here's his spin.
I think he's deliberately spinning the narrative that whereby he's a victim of the deep state spying on him or spying on the campaign, which is not the case. It's what I would call my informed opinion that given the massive effort the Russians made and the number of citizens that they touched, to me it just exceeds logic and credulity that they didn't affect the election. And it's my belief they actually turned it.
So I ask you, was the FBI spying on Trump's campaign?
No, they were not. They were spying on a term I don't particularly like, but on what the Russians were doing.
Why doesn't he like that? He should be happy that
Well,
we're
he should
doing.
be.
Okay, first of all, the James Clapper's on The View. I don't think the top intel guy from any team should be on The View. Second of all,
Jesse.
He just admitted they spied. But wait, they were just trying to help President Trump. President Trump should thank them for spying on the campaign, right?
Jesse, one thing you said opening up, and the question is, did the Obama administration know about this? Did the Justice Department under Obama know about this? I don't believe for 1 minute they didn't know. I believe Obama knew about what was going on. I believe his Justice Department knew what was going on, and it's all falling apart.
No, that's a great point, Bill. We have evidence that the White House was in the loop on this. We have some Page Strzok texts. At one point, they say, quote, the White House is running this, talking about this counterintelligence operation. There are these briefings with the top people in the Obama team. White House Chief of Staff was in on the loop on this. How could Obama not know that this was happening?
I mean, after all, when you have just take the Steele dossier, for example, that was some fellow from MI6, which is the equivalent of CIA, and then CIA was involved, FBI was involved, and the Department of Justice. The only place those organizations come to a point where it can be ordered and coordinated is at the president.
Yeah, and
So,
we do have records now that this spy, or whatever you want to call him, over there in England, he was getting paid pretty handsomely by the Obama administration. Right around the same time he was running these dirty tricks. This guy was connected to MI6, CIA. He'd done some dirty tricks in elections in the past. He'd been outspoken about his support for Hillary Clinton, and even tried to get a job within the Trump administration afterwards. So, Jeff, I mean, it's all coming apart.
It is, and to see Clapper and Brennan out there with the titles of, former director, et cetera, these guys are no longer intelligence officials, and it's time for the president to start striking back at them. And by that, I mean, a lot of these senior people get to keep their security clearances so that they can consult within people with government. there's no need for there to have security clearances anymore. Start taking away Brennan's security clearance or access to anything, Clapper's security clearance or access to anything, because they have become partisans. They are not out there doing what they're supposed to have done as professionals, which is to do your job and be blind, be agnostic when it comes to party politics.
That's
they're
a
just
bold
not,
move to
partisans.
make, and I think President Trump would probably make that move, or at least flirt with doing that. You brought up an interesting point about people, though, still in the FBI or still in the DOJ that do have these clearances. We're hearing word here at Fox News that there may be some people coming forward, maybe some whistleblowers that might like to talk about how James Comey ran these operations, how he dealt with the Clintons, how he dealt with the Trump campaign. Let's just go around. If you guys were still in the government, would you guys come forward and testify and lawyer up?
Well, the good news is the OIG report's about to come out, and the OIG has the ability to protect the whistleblowers within the Department of Justice and within the FBI. So I'm hopeful, optimistic that some of those folks will do the right thing and get protected by the OIG, and we might see some of their content coming out in his report.
Steve, what about you?
Jesse, they need to break down the blue wall of silence. When the ship is sinking, no one is going to throw you a life raft.
And Bill, what do you think?
Well, I mean, according to the Constitution, you have recourse to Congress, and that's exactly what I did in 2002 and won.
You won.
I mean, I went to Congress to report some of the spying on U.S. citizens. It's all a lie when they tell you they're after the Russians. All their tapping points in the Fairview program are internal in the U.S. There's 11 points that they could pick up every foreigner coming into or out of or through the United States. If they stayed at those 11 points, they get them all.
Yeah, and you know what? If they actually, you know, the Russians that they did indict, all they were doing was calling Hillary names on Facebook. Not that bad. Guys, got to run. Thank you. Up next, two incredibly accomplished former FBI agents give us the inside story of what's happening inside the Bureau right now and why current agents are reportedly so fed up they want to testify before Congress. If Spygate is real, if the Obama administration actually spied on a political opponent without justification, it could be the biggest scandal in U.S. history. So it's little wonder that former FBI Chief James Comey, appointed by Obama and fired by Trump, was in full denial mode last night.
Do you find that to be at all possible or probable? I'm going to just play devil's advocate, that there was a spy inserted into his campaign by an intelligence agency?
I don't find it possible, and I know it not to be true, which is why I'm confident that something else will be bigger than Watergate next week.
Well then, why are current FBI agents reportedly so disgusted with Comey that they're practically begging Congress to make them testify? Rank and file FBI agents told the Daily Caller they want to testify to Congress that politics and incompetence at the top are destroying the Bureau. Here's how Senator Ron Johnson, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, responded to that report Wednesday on The Angle.
What has surprised me is we haven't had FBI agents come forward to our committee. They'll go to the press.
Well, they're going to go, and they want to testify on what, Senator?
We heard that when Comey exonerated Clinton, that they actually wanted to, they were going to blow a gasket, basically. Why haven't they come forward? Come forward to my committee. We'll protect you.
Sounds like Comey's problems may just be beginning. Let's discuss Spygate with two distinguished retired members of the Bureau. In Phoenix, former FBI National Spokesperson John Iannarelli, and in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, former FBI agent and counterterrorism expert Chad Jenkins, who was awarded 3 Bronze Star medals during his service as an Army Ranger. So I don't think these guys are getting their stories straight, John. You heard at the top of the show, Clapper says there was a spy in there, and then Comey on the late night shows says there wasn't a spy. I mean, kind of important to make sure everybody's on the same page, don't you think?
I think so. I find it odd that Director Comey is going on Conan O'Brien to talk about these important issues. I guess the Food Network wasn't available last night.
And Clapper's going on The View, so.
Exactly. 2 hard-hitting programs that are going to get to the bottom of this. I will tell you that agents across the board are non-political. They remain unbiased in doing their work. But at the top, there clearly appears to have been a problem there, because if they were interested in Russians, the first thing you're going to talk to is the person that would be the victim of the Russians.
Right.
That didn't happen.
No. Instead, they spied on that person and surveilled them. Chad, it's not good for James Comey. He's basically contaminated this so-called crime scene. When you think about sending all these biased agents in there, when you bring in the fake dossier and the illegal spying, it doesn't look good. If this was a court of law, this thing would get tossed. Do you think that's the genesis of this anger by the boots at the FBI or not?
I think it is, Jesse. We're at the point where, you know, the judge in this is the American people, and the American people are being lied to on all sides at this point. No one really knows where the truth lies. So at this point, what I recommend is this whole entire investigation, the special counsel, it needs to be declassified. We are at the point where we're you know, a house divided will fall on itself, and the American society as a whole will fall on itself if we don't get to the bottom of what the truth is. Not the half truth, but the full truth. And the only way to do that is to have these agents come out, whether it's through subpoenas and testifying to these committees. Something has to happen in order to get everything out there so that we can all decide and see for ourselves what really is taking place in this mess.
Yeah, there's a real insurrection brewing with the rank and file there. James Comey, obviously not an admired leader. Remember, we heard things about his leadership during the campaign. There was a lot of people very upset with the way he treated the Hillary Clinton criminal probe. Just look at the difference, John. Hillary's people were given immunity, and Trump's people, they're going scorched earth. Hillary destroyed evidence under subpoena, and the Trump people have given over millions and millions of documents. It's just very unfair to the average person with the way this thing has been handled politically by the Bureau.
For more than 100 years, the FBI enjoyed this great reputation of there to defend the American people. And I'm afraid in the past couple of years, that reputation is diminishing. Not because of the rank and file, like you said, but because of the actions of people like this. In the past, the FBI has always been very clear. We treat both sides of the political aisle the same. But yes, there are certainly problems here that is not congruent with the way one side is being treated versus the other. I agree with my colleague. We need to come clear here and let the American people know what's going on so they can have confidence in the FBI.
Yeah, I mean, there's lying taking place all over. The Tucker last night had Joe DeGenova on, and he had this to say about just the atmosphere over there.
They are lying in a most unbelievably brazen and insidious way. If they were not spying on the Trump campaign, why didn't they just tell the Trump people, the Russians are coming after you, be careful? Because that's not what they were doing. They were spying on the Trump campaign, trying to frame people, set them up. Comey and Clapper and Brennan are a group of psychotics who they can't stop lying.
You know, you made a point about the setting up. Because if you look at the way Page and Papadopoulos became under surveillance, you know, they were getting invited over to England and wined and dined, and they had their hotels and airlines paid for. They were getting set up for drinks with Clinton donors. You know, the way the Flynn deal, he was ambushed without an attorney by Peter Strzok. Even the Trump Tower meeting looks suspicious in hindsight. You have the Russian lawyer granted an exceptional visa by Loretta Lynch to come into the country. She meets with the president of Fusion GPS before and after the Trump Tower meeting. Looking back, a lot of it looks set up. Do you believe it was set up?
As an attorney, I would take this case in a heartbeat and claim entrapment at the very least. It doesn't look good. The optics, even if they had the best of intentions, which I don't think existed, it looks bad. That's why these political cases, the FBI is so careful, because they want to be concerned with how the public will perceive their actions. That wasn't done in this case, and it's hurt everyone.
Well, this is why, Chad, because they won't give any information to the congressional oversight people who have a constitutional right to use their oversight powers to look into what the FBI is doing. Why are they stonewalling if everything was on the up and up?
Well, you're right, Jesse, and we're to the point where we can no longer say, oh, well, the FBI and DOJ is apolitical and they wear the blindfold that Lady Liberty wears. That is gone. That ship has sailed.
Yeah.
And that goes back to my point where we need to divulge everything. The truth needs to be told. Because you look at it, I mean, going back to James Comey, you know, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I actually read his book, and that's actually what changed my opinion of him. Too often, one, he's always on the right side of history throughout. The only really vulnerability he ever shares is that he maybe was a bully to a college kid one time. But outside of that, in his professional career, he makes every decision rightful every single time. And then when you look at what happened with Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton on the tarmac, right there it shows there's political involvement in that. And as the FBI director, he needed to address that. Step up to the plate, be the leader that you were made to be, and address that if you're really, truly trying to be apolitical and not let politics
he's above it
your
all,
decisions.
and he's so sanctimonious. Listen to what he said about the president to Stephanopoulos here.
Is Donald Trump unfit to be president?
I don't think he's medically unfit to be president. I think he's morally unfit to be president.
You know, for a leaker and for an operator, a political animal that really has a tough track record at the FBI with all these abuses piling up, I don't think he's fit to be casting moral judgment on the commander-in-chief. Guys, got to run. Great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
Laura's interview with a former Trump campaign advisor on what it was like to be targeted by an FBI informant, that's next. The Russia investigation turned into Spygate after the New York Times reported last week that the FBI had placed at least one informant inside the Trump presidential campaign. The Times said an informant met several times with Carter Page, who only served briefly as an advisor to the Trump campaign. Former Trump campaign advisor Michael Caputo says he was approached by a suspicious individual during the election. Laura spoke with both Page and Caputo on Monday about those experiences. Here's a look back.
Carter, let's start with you. You had a lot of contact with this informant, whatever we want to call him, informant, spy, mole. And I want to read one of the emails that he sent to you that was released by, I think it was Daily Caller, got this initially. Dear Carter, I thought I'd write as the summer wears on to ask how you are and what your plans are at this point. It seems attention has shifted a bit from the collusion investigation to the contempt, of course he misspelled it, within the White House, and how or if Mr. Scaramucci will be accommodated there. I must assume this gives you some relief. We're here in Virginia, et cetera, et cetera. Be in touch when you have the time. Would be great to catch up. We're not mentioning the informant's name, but Carter, when did you first meet this informant that we now know as an informant? And just briefly tell us about that exchange.
Well, you know, again, similar to you in terms of being cautious about identity, I have also, I never knew anything about the person I was speaking with, who's a university professor at Cambridge in the UK at the time. I was invited to participate in a conference in July of 2016, and everything seemed totally normal. So, and frankly, I've been falsely accused myself, and you know, we'll see what happens in terms of, you know, as further details come out. But based on everything I've seen thus far, you know, we still don't have any information. So there's been a lot of
we know he was paid $1 million over 5 years, pretty good money, as a consultant or researcher. But, you know, you're right. Well, we shall see. But question, Carter, before we go on to Michael, who started the conversation? How did the date begin? Sorry, but, you know, did he approach you? Did he mention Russia collusion first? How did it go down?
You know, we had, it was a multi-day conference, and there were scholars and people from government, both from the United Kingdom.
I know, but stay focused with me, Carter. Yeah. Did he approach you first? Did you approach him? How did you first start speaking?
I don't even recall. We spent a couple days together, and you know, there was a couple
days together.
Well, yeah, it was a long event over several days, and at
right.
Cambridge
But there were a lot
University.
of what I'm saying is there were a lot of scholars there, and you know you have to know the process of grooming someone. When someone is an informant, they don't just go up to someone and say, hey, I want to plant information on you or find out what you have. You try to win someone's trust over. That's how it goes.
I never felt groomed. So if he's good at doing that, then perhaps that's part of the game.
But you don't know, standing here, right, you don't know who mentioned the Russia collusion issue first.
I can't even remember. I think Russia was in the news, and I think, a lot of politics sort of revolves around various news events. And so, these various stories came up. Again, we stayed in touch for over a year. And while
but looking
all
back on it, Carter, but looking back, I'm sorry to interrupt, but or limited time, looking back on it, does anything seem odd, or just, how you know something now, you're like, oh, maybe that was a little odd, or any other contacts you had with any other people that seem now, in retrospect, given what we know now, odd, out of the ordinary, or maybe in some way improper? Well, I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, and we'll see. Maybe this individual who we're talking about might have been a little bit nicer than I might otherwise have expected. Although, we were talking about all of the abuses that were happening with this dodgy dossier, which was first debuted in September 2016 as a way of damaging the Trump campaign and basically destroying myself. And so, and he always seemed very sympathetic about that. So, yeah. Again, we'll see. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. People that know him in Washington, in senior circles that I've spoken with afterwards, say, he seemed like a pretty decent guy. So I give. That would be the perfect person to use for. Maybe I'm just cynical, been around Washington too long. Carter, if only they gave you the benefit of the doubt, like you're giving other people the benefit of the doubt. Michael, let's go to you. You've been through the meat grinder at the Mueller investigation. He has the legal eagles, all these really highly skilled interviewers, prosecutors on his side. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them, I believe, have a built-in animus against Donald Trump. You are very angry that you've been dragged into this as a former associate of Roger Stone. You also did some work for the Trump campaign. Tell us what you think. You just heard what Carter said about this, reported informant for the FBI.
Well, I think Carter's been through more of a meat grinder than I have, and he's handled it as a gentleman. In fact, when I first heard about this stuff, I think in 2016, 2017, about Carter, I wasn't very kind in my criticism, and I think it looks like they were really abusing Carter. I think they were really treating him poorly, and I think a lot of us owe Carter an apology because we didn't wait to hear the truth at the end, and now we're finding out that his country was really failing him for months and months and even years. I'm angry. I'm surprised that Carter's not. He's a greater man than I think. But I'll tell you, this is really sick and twisted stuff. And like Carter said, this gentleman who shall not be named has a reputation of being very pro-America, very patriotic. And if, in fact, he was brought into this under false circumstances or false pretenses as well, he'd be the kind of guy that a deep state would target.
Yeah. Well, the dossier was the basis for getting this FISA warrant. I don't care what these people say. It was all a big lie. Without this dossier, Carter Page would not have been surveilled in the fall of 2016. That would not have happened. That's why they were running to that Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, to try to get him involved. And he's like, I don't even like Paul Manafort. This is ridiculous. So they were doing everything they could. They were working the Page angle. They probably were working this informant angle. And they brought you in, Michael, which we'll get to in a moment. But I want to play for you what Sally Yates, the acting attorney general at the very beginning of the Trump administration, she's the one partly responsible for interviewing Michael Flynn at the beginning, what she said today on Morning Joe. Let's watch.
I think what we're seeing here is the president has just taken his all-out assault on the rule of law to a new level. Mm-hmm. And this time he is ordering up an investigation of the investigators who are examining his own campaign. That's really shocking. Rod Rosenstein is trying to strike a balance here between diffusing this situation, but also protecting the rule of law and the institutional integrity of the department.
Carter Page, as I pointed out in the opening angle, the government under the Obama administration had surveilled people and lied about it. And whether it was Clapper, whether it was the FBI under Holder, surveilling journalists, they have a history of having a problem telling the truth on surveillance. So for Sally Yates to run out there and say, oh, well, Donald Trump's attacking the rule of law, come on, your reaction.
Well, you know, just going to Michael's point about, you know, things they did to me, President Trump during the campaign would often say, this is not about me, this is about us. And I think of all of the terrible things that happened to so many people, like Michael, like, you know, some of the other people who were involved allegedly with this informant. I actually, you know, spoke very positively. I got a positive impression about this informant, and you know, a couple of people I mentioned him to in the campaign, you know, I was a pretty positive endorsement. So I hope and pray that, you know, all these allegations turn out to be false. And part of why I'm somewhat open about my communications with him is that it'll lead to some truth finally from the Department of Justice. I've been asking for, you know, DOJ to own up to these things. And it's funny, the defamation suit I have against a top media organization and DOJ, the media organization is actually much more honest than the false pleadings by the DOJ so far.
Right.
So hopefully they clean up.
We got to play this James Clapper for Michael. He's basically just justifying the use of any type of informant here. Let's watch.
The focus here, and as it was with the intelligence community, is not on the campaign per se, but what the Russians were doing to try to instantiate themselves in the campaign or to influence or leverage it. So if there was someone that was observing that sort of thing, well, that's a good thing because the Russians pose a threat to the very basis of our political system.
Michael, so you see a pattern here? Former Obama administration officials justifying spying on, surveilling, whatever you want to call it, putting a mole in on an opposing campaign and a hotly contested election year. Final thoughts.
I'll tell you. You've spent time in Russia. Carter and I both have. In Russia, they call this Siloviki, the national security leadership that secretly spies on the entire citizenry of Russia. And here we are in the United States with our own Siloviki underneath President Obama. Let me tell you something that I know for a fact. This informant, this person that they tried to plan into the campaign and even into the administration, if you believe Axios, he's not the only person that came at the campaign. And the FBI is not the only Obama agency that came at the campaign. I know because they came at me. And I'm looking for clearance from my attorney to reveal this to the public. This is just the beginning. And I'll tell you, when we finally find out the truth about this, Director Clapper and the rest of them are going to be wearing some orange suits.
Michael Caputo and Carter Page, I hope we get to the bottom of this a lot sooner than a lot of people are predicting, because the American people deserve to know who is behind this, who authorized it, and how high up the ladder it went. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Laura.
We should note that a producer got in touch with the person Mr. Caputo was just talking about, and he claims he was not working for any intelligence agency. We'll see. Up next, Americans may be fed up with Russia, Russia, Russia. We'll show you what a new poll says and examine whether the Russia obsession will backfire on Democrats in November. Welcome back to our Ingram Angle special, The Russian Cloud. We are seeing signs that the Russia investigation could backfire on the president's opponents as Americans grow tired of it. A new survey from Harvard Capps Harris poll shows 30% of Americans believe the investigation should stop immediately. 20% say the investigation should wind down within the next 3 months. And on Wednesday, Nancy Pelosi heard from an increasingly skeptical public during her CNN town hall.
If Trump actually colluded with the Russians, why isn't he found guilty of it after a year of investigation? Wouldn't there be some type of concrete proof by now?
Well, you know that there is an investigation going on under Counsel Mueller, and that is where we wouldn't have any idea of what's going on in that, and nor should we know what's going on in that investigation. But it takes time.
Are Democrats putting too many eggs in the Mueller basket? Let's ask former Democratic Congressman Jason Altmaier in Jacksonville, Florida, and conservative commentator and Fox News contributor Rachel Campos Duffy in Wausau, Wisconsin. Did I get that right? Wausau?
No, Wausau.
Wausau, gotcha. So
Come
ladies
on,
first,
Jesse.
we'll start. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm from the East Coast. We'll start with you, though, because I'm such a gentleman. I think the Democrats should just nominate Mueller to be, the Democrat nominee, because they believe that's the only person that can stop President Trump. They don't have anything else.
Every day that the Democrats talk about Russia and Trump and the Republicans talk about America, it's a winning day for the Republicans. And I heard your poll numbers earlier. The one poll number we should focus on is 75%, and that's the number of Americans who give Donald Trump credit for crushing it on the economy. So look, the Democrats are frustrated right now, and there are a few people out there who are trying to raise the red flags. One of them is Mark Penn, a former Clinton camp person, saying, hey, you guys, get off this special counsel, get off of Russia, come up with a message, because you don't have one, and that's a problem coming into the midterms.
Jason, do you think the whole focus on Mueller and Russia, isn't that doing a disservice to the Democratic Party going into the midterms, because they haven't crafted any coherent message around policy that can jive with the voters?
I don't know if that's the case. If you follow social media and the resistance movement, certainly they talk about Russia all the time. There are other networks that talk about Russia all the time. But I think the candidates that are out on the trail all across the country looking forward to November, they're talking about other issues. They're talking about jobs and the economy and climate change and other things that are topical to their districts.
I wouldn't really talk too much about climate change. I don't think that's the best policy prescription for the midterms. But, I understand people when they're politicking and they're, pressing the flesh out there at the barbecues, they can talk one-on-one about stuff that's good for the local district. But the megaphone with the media, the machine, the Democratic Party apparatus, they're not talking about kitchen table issues, Rachel. They're talking about impeachment.
No, they absolutely are
They're talking about Russia. I don't even know what their slogan is next midterm.
Yeah, absolutely. The message from the Democrat Party is not just Russia, but also vote for us, we'll impeach Donald Trump. And the American people, I don't think, are buying it. And that's why we're seeing this slide this blue wave is turning into a trickle because of that.
Pelosi's not even buying that. If it's too crazy for Pelosi, then maybe they should reconsider.
Very true. Look, I think they counted on two things. They thought they could have a 24/7 bad press on Trump, which, we know it's 90% bad press on him. They thought that they could, start with this whole Russia hoax, and they thought they could continue the resistance. I know our guest here, Jason Altmaier, says, the resistance. Well, the resistance is the Democrat Party, and the American people see that. And I think what they didn't count on is that after a year and a half of spying on Trump, trying to frame his people from his campaign, they have come up with nothing in a year and a half, zero evidence. And then there's something else they didn't expect. And that's what I said earlier. They didn't expect him to crush it on the economy, to decimate ISIS, to really keep all of the promises that he did on the campaign trail. And I can tell you, here in Wausau, Wisconsin, when I talk to people, that's the one thing, it's interesting. It's the one thing I hear the most, whether they agree with him or not. They go, this is a guy who keeps his promises. And voters, I think, just didn't expect that because they got cynical and thought it would never happen.
Jason, what do you think about that?
I wouldn't say that they've come up with nothing. There's been 17 indictments and 5 guilty pleas. So that's certainly not
nothing to do with collusion.
Nothing
Two of
having
those
to do with
guilty
Russian
pleas,
collusion.
General Flynn and Papadopoulos, have to do with Russia, and certainly the Mueller investigation is not complete. So I'm not prejudging what the investigation is going to do.
Okay.
Yes, both directly involve Russia.
Is not collusion, and I think
but the report
perjury
is
with
not
Papadopoulos, he got the date wrong, and the FBI agents that interviewed Flynn came back and said, I don't actually think he's lying. But you know what? We're going to let the
Well,
Mueller
he pled
investigation.
guilty.
Yeah,
he
well,
pled
listen,
guilty.
we will see about that.
I think that's pretty clear.
We will see
But
about
look,
that.
I'm not prejudging what the report is going to say. I'm simply saying that it's an ongoing investigation. There have been laws broken. There have been guilty pleas and indictments. So I don't buy this witch hunt idea. This is a legitimate issue, and let's get to the bottom of it.
It might be boomeranging and turning all around because these abuses keep stacking up on the Democrat side when they were in office, and it might not look too good once we get everything straightened out. I got to run, guys. Thank you very much.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jesse. The indictments are going to vindicate the president, and we're sitting on the mother of all scandals.
All right,
it's gonna
as President Trump
in front
says,
of us.
we will see what happens. Up next, we'll reveal the leverage the president's legal team is now using to get the special counsel to end its investigation of the president. Up next.
There is a lot of adrenaline with being a journalist. I think it's one of the things that drew us to the business. You want to be well informed so that whenever news breaks, you're ready to tackle it. I think the nighttime hours are invaluable. The fact that we've added a hard news hour at 11 p.m. Eastern is critical. Whatever is developed through the day, people are fully informed from coast to coast before they go to bed. There is something about getting that score, knowing you've gotten it right, and breaking something that's really important.